It really is my delight to be with my two friends, Chris Christensen and Eugene Chen. I'll ask them to introduce themselves momentarily. My name is Scott Hawk, and I'm the Director for Strategic Partnerships at Acalvio. And Chris and Eugene, I think we're past 3 years in our relationship. So it's been a very entertaining, fun, and happy time as we've kind of built a service together. So I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk with you guys and tell folks where the service has been and what some of the value is. So Chris, why don't I start with you? Why don't you say hello to our group, and then we'll pass it to Eugene.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. My name is Chris Christensen. I've been with Honeywell for about 6 years now, and I lead our cybersecurity for building automations. I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit about Alcalvio and our Honeywell threat defense platform.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Eugene.
Hey, I'm Eugene Chen. I joined Honeywell back in 1996, and I've been with the cybersecurity team just for the past 3 years. But it's been fantastic. It's a fast-moving space, and I love it.
Yeah, so I will be advancing the slides today. So there's a little behind the scenes for our
Yeah.
audience. Eugene, you're going to be out first. We'll talk about the OT threat landscape, and then I will take over. We'll talk a little bit about what cyber deception is, so give folks some background, an overview of the Honeywell service, the Honeywell Threat Defense Platform. And then I know you're going to want to stick around because Chris is talking about a use case that Honeywell deployed earlier this year. So I think you'll find some insights from Chris and his team, what they experienced, what their customer saw in the platform, and what they expect to get from the platform. And then we have a surprise at the end, which of course we'll show you at the end, and we'll take questions either along the way in the Q&A piece, but certainly we'll reserve time at the end to have some verbal discussions as well. So Eugene, we're going to get over to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. One thing I wanted to start off by is just cover what's the world like today. I think all of you already know, right, that there's attacks that are increasing every day. And what you may not have realized, it's beyond just the kids and nation states attacking, right? Kids in school attacking their high school, the colleges, what have you. Today, the world is different. We have shooting wars going on. The shooting wars have a pseudo underlying Cold War going on in the background. We have frictions with China and Russia. They are cyber attacking other countries, including the United States, every day. So you can see that no one is safe. The governments aren't safe, our military is not safe, your business is not even safe. And one thing that we've seen over the last decade or so, budgets and focus has really been on the IT network. And so attackers oftentimes will home in on and looking for the OT link into the system because that is the weakest link to getting in, right? So it's something just that you need to be aware of. And what do I mean by IT versus OT? So I'll just cover it. I think most of you probably already know, but IT, those are like your email server, your back offices, your finance, payroll, ordering systems, your Microsoft 365, the office tools, if you will, that are part of your organization. OT is your lighting control system, access control, your key card getting into the building, right, into your facility. If you have under roof manufacturing at your site, so if you're manufacturing phones or electronics, that's the automation system involved with doing that. Or if you're a distribution system for packaging for pharmaceuticals, that's all part of the OT system. So again, that'd be the lighting, the HVAC system, access control, your camera system, the fire response system. That's all part of the OT network. Those systems are in place for decades, often untouched. They can't come down. Right? They can't be disrupted. Email, you can tolerate a 10-minute, a 1 hour, a half-day outage, right? No big deal, no harm, no foul. But you don't want your fire system to go down for a day or an hour. That puts people at risk, right? You don't want your access control system to go haywire, be locked in, locked out, letting anybody in, or not being able to have access to areas of your building. So many of you out there, if you're a building manager or a security manager, you'll have to ask yourself, what assets are on your network? Because the number of assets on your network are directly proportional to the attack surface. So that's when we Honeywell have engaged with our customers, first thing we see is our customers don't know how many assets are actually on the network. And why is that? Because we live in the age of IoT. Almost everything can be connected, either wireless or wired connected, right? Thermostats, temperature sensors, humidity sensors, door controllers, all these things are connected. We live in a connected world. And so it's hard to get a handle on everything that's on the network. So the number one thing that customers want, and it's actually the number one thing that you need to do, is understand what is on your network to get a handle of what the attack surface is. Interestingly, those of you who are responsible for the building or the site, most of you then are also responsible for safety and security. And Honeywell's done another analysis. We worked with industry analysts looking at global data and also our own data within our own customers. And we found out that through our analysis, we found that 60% of OT system safety incident scenarios can be caused by a cyber attack. Think about that. 60% can be caused by or attributed to cyber attacks. These are attacks that can have physical consequences. And if there is a physical consequence, then the cost of that attack goes way up. So the average cost of an attack, of this regular cyber attack globally is about $4.5 million. It's about $9.5 to $10 million in North America. But it balloons to $140 million if a safety incident is involved as part of that attack. It's amazing, right? So if you're responsible for that safety security of your employees, your building, then have you really done an adequate safety assessment if you haven't considered cybersecurity? It's something you really need to ask yourself and evaluate with your team. And then once you get past that, would you even know if an attacker is on your system today? And how would they even get on the system, right? So would you know if a lot of times I hear customers say, I'm not worried about employees getting to the outside world and bringing a virus in because I'm air gapped. Well, I can tell you from experience, I've been working in the space since about 2006. I've got 10 patents on networks and communications and security. What I found in visiting customers, I can tell you like 98% of customers that think they're air gapped are not. They're connected in some way. So it could be happening from an employee, an accidental, creating an accidental threat, misconfiguration, right? Misconfiguration, making mistake clicking on something. I've made mistakes configuring systems in the past. I worked in started out in process control world. Everyone makes mistakes. We're all human beings. So you need to protect yourself both from the threat from within, could be accidental threat, as well as from the outside, right? So I just want to make sure that all of you understand everyone needs some way of monitoring and responding to a threat.
I don't make
And
any mistakes though, just so you know. Like I heard you say everyone. No, I'm just kidding.
That's Chris, ever polite.
no, and actually, so NIST and METER are both organizations within the United States. A recommendation is to have an active defense, right, for these kinds of threats to handle that. So that's actually a recommended practice now to handle threats, with an active defense through deception. All right. Any other comments you might have, Scott? Want to jump into
Oh
the
no,
fray?
well, I like where you're going, right? We advance to the next slide because it really is the OT, the advanced OT attacker that's really putting companies at risk. So if you can't see what your infrastructure looks like, if you can't see it, you can bet for sure that the bad guys can see it. They'll know what paths that they can take to get from one compromised device to another. So the attack vector isn't too much different. The tactics aren't very much different from IT and OT. They still have to move from that compromised device, which is probably some real device doing real work, into this environment where they can do most damage.
I think we can go to the next slide, or are we frozen here?
Okay. Nope.
No. Okay. So I guess skipping a little bit ahead here. So how things look from the OT cybersecurity space, and and air gapped. So, right, this is the air gap. Even if you're air gapped, there you still need to protect yourself from the threat from within. Right? It's never a bad idea to be air gapped, but still not perfect. Right? Again, employee mistakes. And I'd say again, like I've said, most customers, over 90% that think they're air gapped are not. And it's not always just a network connection, which oftentimes there is that, but it's also they will have an access point, a wireless access point at the site. And if they don't know about it or they forgot about, oftentimes they got deployed as part of a project, expansion project, they put it in place for convenience, and then they left it in place. They forgot about it. So now what happens? Now you have an unmanaged access point into your system. Huge, huge risk, right? You never want to have that. And so
Eugene, I see
IT,
you have duct tape protection on this
yeah,
slide, which I remember we were discussing this the other day. This idea that you don't often find customized OT cybersecurity. We'll talk about what Honeywell does outside of this particular service as well. But what are some of the things that you would have seen duct taped into OT cybersecurity in the past? Probably quite a few things.
yeah. I've seen a lot of times where IT houses will take off-the-shelf IT solution for monitoring an IT network and try to inject that onto or put that over top of an OT system. The issue with most of those, they'll have active polling, active scanning of the system that can actually destroy the performance of an OT or manufacturing system or automation control system, can even brick the
Mm.
device. So it's unusable. It becomes a paperweight or doorstop, right? So intolerable, for an OT system.
Yeah, I think that's one of the traits Honeywell brings to this space. Highly targeted accounts, highly targeted technologies for cybersecurity, kind of wrapped in a process. You've noted here that governance is not often a part of the OT cybersecurity space, which leads to all the things that we see on this slide, correct? So.
So what would you do as an organization, right? There's a few things that need to be done. Obviously, education, you want to be able to make sure your workforce is educated and ready to respond. And you also need, and something that's actually different now is business leaders, the executives of these companies are now liable. In many cases, that's decisions that governments have been made. It's like if the company's attacked, the leader, the CEO and the CISO or CIO is now directly responsible for it. So what do you need to do to protect yourself? When you get attacked, the questions will be asked. What have you done to protect your business and protect the shareholders? Right? That's something that I think I glossed over, maybe skipped over today. SEC, I guess last year, had a ruling. If you're a publicly traded company, you have to disclose a cyber attack if it had a significant business impact.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times people say, well, that's the US. That doesn't apply to me. Well, I think probably everyone on the call is US, but actually it's globally, right? Because every company that trades on a US stock exchange, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, what have you, you're subject to these rules, right? So you need to have something that protects you for what is known and the unknown, hence the zero-day attack. So how do you protect yourself against advanced persistent threats, right? These everyday threats, everyone comes up with something new. How would you do that? There's no perfect shield against every kind of threat out there. How do you protect against the unknown? And that's where the NIST and METER organizations have recommended protection, active deception to protect you and your facility against these zero-day threats.
Yeah, I
Scott,
like the third bullet
yeah,
here, Eugene, because Honeywell has a suite of services. We do have a slide on it in a little bit, um, but we're not talking about point solutions. We're not eliminating other important layers with these types of cyber deception tools that we're talking about. Security is in fact an onion, and you need all different layers. You need redundancy and resiliency in your plan. But you also can't have mistaken faith or belief that, oh, the layers that you have installed, particularly the perimeter layers, are all you're going to need. And that's really where we'll be discussing the value of HTTP in the next little bit.
So I'd go even further and say, I mean, we've had examples where some customers did have monitoring systems in place and the human ignored the alert, right? You can
Yeah.
get so many notifications, it becomes noise, or you look at it and you don't trust it, you're not sure what it is. And so that's the other reason, again, going back to best practice recommendations, where active, again, the key here is active, deception techniques. So when an attacker comes in, they're actively engaged without a human having to get into the loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you obviously you still need humans to do the full-on investigation, but you want those first steps to be taken automatically where possible without disrupting your business. And so the solution that we're about to introduce you today at the back end here will, is that style of solution. Gives attacker engagement, gives you more time to assess the situation and take corrective action manually.
Yeah, we should say, we're playing a little fast and loose with this concept of cyber deception. We will talk a little bit more about what that specifically means here. But yeah, there's an assumption that folks have an understanding that these technologies that we wrote on this slide, new and compelling capabilities, essentially using cyber deception to detect earlier and faster. And you already pointed this out, Eugene, the idea that a SOC team is getting too many alerts for them to accurately respond to. And what we're trying to do with a system like this is to deliver high value alerts that allow the SOC teams to focus. And that's one of the key value propositions that we'll talk about.
Well, the flip side of that also is high value alerts that can take automated action. So the OT systems
Yeah.
people can, are not tied up with, again, noise. IT is not flooded with noise, right? So it's the appropriate alert to the appropriate person, and with guidance of guided action, I guess. So Honeywell's approach is one of defense in depth. What do I mean by defense in depth? As Scott said, it's like there's layers of defense. It's like an onion, right? So as I alluded to before or stated before, there's no perfect shield or perfect defense against every kind of attack. So you need these layers. And I've broken this down to five, or Honeywell and I've broken this down into 5 categories for the layers. The first one is probably something you're already familiar with. I always say it's like the physical one, right? It's the fence, the wall, the locked doors, the locks on the doors outside the building and within the building, the access control system. So your access control system, first layer of defense, right? And that keeps people in the spaces they're supposed to be and keeps intruders out. Other layers then are application data security. Honeywell offers a means of monitoring your OT network and the performance of those different units, and having automated patching to maintain the server operating system, workstation operating system, firmware, make sure they're up to date for security patches. And when you deploy, we want to make sure there's secure configuration is used. We have something called host and endpoint security category. So in there's your antivirus, right? Your endpoint antivirus on the workstations and the servers, and make sure some of the basics are covered here, like backup and restore. If you're attacked and you're ransomed, it's going to be very difficult for you to get back on your feet if you don't have a backup. So that is actually part of our portfolio as well, is having that backup management capability, and having also another layer for controlling and managing connections into the network, which is called SMX, Secure Media Exchange, right? So we've seen that in the Iran, right? They had their centrifuges disrupted through insider attack through a USB port. So this kind of solution protects against that style of attack. Our next category is network and security. I'll come back to it. And our last one is policy frameworks and procedures. And I'd say this is something, I guess it was last year, the TSA came out with something that was a little bit counter to what I had really been promoting. I'd always said you should start your security walk with a cybersecurity site assessment. Determine what you have, what the gaps are against what your needs are, what your goals are, and then develop a plan to start closing those gaps. But here I actually think the government got it right. The TSA said, you know what, the number one thing, that's not often that happens, right? The number one thing that you need is an incident response plan. It doesn't matter what tools, cybersecurity protection tools you have on your site, you better know what to do when you're attacked, right? Because today, I think like about 85% of all businesses have been attacked, or you're being poked at every single day. So you better know what to do to keep your systems running, keep your business going if you are attacked. So the number one thing really is get that incident response plan in place, do a cybersecurity assessment, start closing those gaps, and then put in continuous monitoring and active response system like we're about to just demonstrate to you in the next slide. So that would be the threat defense platform is what we'd like to promote. We have Cyber Insights for continuous monitoring, and we have threat defense platform that also does monitoring and immediate threat detection, continuous threat detection. And it uses some novel techniques. Some people say, well, isn't that just a honeypot? Well, this isn't your grandfather's honeypot. This is an active defense. There's an AI, there's intelligence built in, and devices. That's one of the values that Honeywell's brought to the table with the Calvio. We actually developed a portfolio of assets, right? And I think of these as, I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, Scott, forgive me,
Oh,
but
go ahead.
I think
No,
of this for those of you out there who might be Star Trek fans or techies, right? Trekkies, especially if it was the Star Trek New Generation. I call it the holodeck effect, right? So essentially, we're projecting a holodeck into the system to create these projections of fake devices on the system. They look and feel just like real controllers, real cameras, real devices, and servers and workstations out on the system. And if an attacker comes in, they can be captured by one of these devices, and then we can start watching their style of attack. And especially if it's a 0-day attack, now we can learn. And how's that done, Scott?
yeah, I was just going to say you were already getting there. So you weren't running very far ahead, Eugene, as always. Um, yeah, as Eugene mentioned, the decoys are kind of the star of the show when we talk about a cyber deception platform. But there's also other components that work their way into the Honeywell solution, and Chris will talk a little bit more about these when he gets to his use case bit. What we're talking about is the use of these realistic assets and then the necessary information. So in the Honeywell solution, the fake information sits in the breadcrumbs, which is information that gets placed on the real assets in the environment. So in an OT environment, that could be an engineering workstation. It could be some of the real cameras or printers or some of these other things that are sitting around the network. And it's the exact type of information that the attacker is looking for. A bad guy's not going to breach a decoy immediately because the decoys are not involved in the operational flow of the organization. The decoy PLC or the decoy building controller or the decoy HVAC controller, these are not really doing anything in real life, so an attacker can't get there first. What they will do is look for the juicy targets in the environment, and that's what the decoys are designed to do. And without getting too much into the technology, we're not talking about putting physical decoys in an environment. We're talking about projecting decoys from a remote location, could be in the same physical location, but projecting decoys into a location or a land segment. In fact, we'll show a Purdue model here. So for those of you familiar with that type of architecture, you'll be able to see where the technology is deployed. So we've got breadcrumbs that are placed on real devices in an effort to help to give the attacker bad information to get them to move towards the decoys. And then we also use a technology called baits. And these are tuned for specific uses. Baits will alarm or alert us when they're picked up. So these are also placed on the endpoints. So a bait could be a fake tool. It might be a fake command line interface function. It could be fake antivirus. It could be things like a beaconing document. We can create customized documents that we think will look juicy in that environment. And then when a bad guy picks that up, that alerts the platform. So that gives you your first insight into the early detection capabilities of this platform.
So just to make it a little bit, Scott, how does that exactly work? It's a fake tool. So you might have like a command line, command exe.
Yeah, exactly. So like on a particular, let's look at a workstation in an OT environment. That's going to be a Windows machine. It'll have a fairly standard Windows build. And in there might be a dozen different command line Active Directory tools. Right? So these are things that a more advanced user might want to use in order to query Active Directory, for example. Well, the user of that engineering workstation in that manufacturing environment or that building environment, they don't ever have to go below the interface. So they shouldn't be using those tools anyway. So as part of the deployment, we can replace some or all of those real tools with fake tools, because those are the exact tools that the attacker wants to use, because they'll be rooting around in the lower levels of the OS, searching for credentials so they can move up, they can move privileges up, gain better access, and searching for information about the environment. So in an OT environment, maybe Active Directory is playing a big part, maybe it's playing a small part. So maybe they'll disable the antivirus on there. Right? Maybe they'll want to, maybe there's a Honeywell tool on there that we can have a real version and a fake version running. So they go to disable the Honeywell service, we're able to replicate that. We're able to alert on that, I should say. So there's a lot of ways that we can design these baits. You already said, Eugene, that we've designed quite a few already for default implementations, but we have the ability to customize a lot of this infrastructure, which is pretty cool. So this cyber deception allows us to deploy a capability at scale, because we're not physically installing decoys anywhere in the environment. We can detect typical attacker techniques like reconnaissance and lateral movement, credential use, credential attacks like brute force, and these things we can detect and report that information back to the defender. And what's really important is that we integrate this into the existing SOC workflow, whether it's Honeywell doing a portion or majority of the SOC operations for this customer, or whether the customer has their own or a third-party SOC operations. We want to take this information because we view it as high fidelity activity. Alert comes from one of our devices. That device is not ever used in production. So anything interacting with that device, any alert coming from a device, a decoy, is highly valuable to a defender. And that's really what we're trying to do here. So that's gentlemen, before I move on, any comments from either of you? Okay. And it would be lovely to say that Eugene, Scott, and Chris advocate for this service, but there's actually a little bit more juice behind deception in general than just us three. If you hit the Acalvio website, you'll find information about 2 recent Gartner reports. So if you're a fan of Gartner, as recently as this April, they published 2 reports highlighting the use of deception in endpoint security and in network security. And the network piece in particular, Eugene, is where Honeywell has this service. So it's applicable there. Eugene mentioned MITRE a few times. They actually have a new program called Engage, which encourages defenders to engage with adversaries. And that's kind of an advanced feature of the Honeywell Threat Defense Platform, because once attackers are interacting with a decoy, the Honeywell Operations Center will see what the attacker is up to and then can use the platform to automatically or on command place other deceptions in the environment to continue engaging and learning from the attacker. So that's an advanced deception capability, but it comes along with the Honeywell Threat Defense Platform. And then lastly on this slide, in the most recent CISA infrastructure roadmap, cybersecurity roadmap, they've been recommending deception technology for a couple of years. So as of 2024, 2023, they're recommending existing and advanced deception technology be deployed and adopted by organization. And we're talking about an advanced deception capability here. So we think this is next gen tech. So a couple of bullet points right down the middle. With cyber deception, we're not analyzing, capturing traffic. We're not watching for the use of traffic. So we're not guessing or estimating or in any way making assumptions about what is bad activity. As we said earlier, any touch to one of our decoys or one of our baits will generate an alert. So we're not based on signatures, not based on any anomalies. We're not using any heuristics. And we really don't care about protocols, other than the fact that we've incorporated protocols to make the decoys accurate, we're not relying on understanding of a protocol to know about the data that's on the network. The system works fundamentally different from that. As a result, there's no agents to maintain, so it isn't like a bad guy can come onto a real device and see an agent running for the Honeywell Threat Defense Platform and disable that agent. The baits and the breadcrumbs I talked before are not agents. They are not running. And also as a result, we can detect 0 days this way. And not on this slide, we can also detect and slow ransomware. So the baits will react to ransomware attacks on real devices, and the decoys themselves, they are so accurate, they will respond and be affected by a ransomware attack. But as I mentioned earlier, the decoys are not physically on the network. They're in a virtual environment somewhere else, so the ransomware attack will not propagate past a decoy. So yeah, this is not a ransomware solution, but it can go a long way to your response efforts because it will and should slow down a ransomware attack. Then the last thing that I wanted to mention on this slide is that this technology, Honeywell can deploy it across your IT and OT infrastructure. So this is one of the very few solutions that will give the defender the ability to see both. So we'll have inventory information about endpoints. We'll have broad infrastructure information about the networks that the system is deployed on. So we don't need to be exclusive to an OT network here. We can begin to see attacks that are coming into the OT network from IT. And then depending on the integrations that are enabled in the environment, we can pass information back and forth between the various other security tools and do take automatic action or share data between the tools. So it's definitely a bonus there. So what are some of our hallmarks here? Globally scalable, OT deceptions are built in. We support air-gapped networks. This was a comment, Eugene, that you had made earlier. Even if you don't have an internet connection, it's vulnerable, but we can deploy the solution locally so that defenders that are local can detect this activity. We do not just support Honeywell equipment. In fact, there is pre-built decoys from other manufacturers, and it's a fairly simple process to create custom decoys. And that goes without saying through all of Honeywell's portfolio. You know, although we would love everybody to be Honeywell customers, we understand environments are complex, so that's not a deterrent for a solution like this. And then some of the other issues that you run into with OT cybersecurity, the decoys provide logs, telemetry, and some other information. So when we are engaging with an adversary, the PLCs that we've deployed as decoys, the building management systems, ESXi servers, cameras, and things like that, they'll provide an extra level of information to the defender. And then I kind of teed this up earlier, fully compatible with the very popular and rightly so Purdue model framework for industrial control systems. So I'm going to look at one more slide, Chris, before we get over to you. This is about as technical as we'll get. What you see in this slide are the five Purdue levels. And then you'll see a couple of the Honeywell products mixed in here into the various levels. And we called out a couple. Cyber Insights, which I would say is Honeywell's marquee product. That sits at a couple of levels. You see those icons are blue. And then you see the Honeywell technology that sits locally. We call that a sensor. This is a software sensor or an appliance that we would place at various levels of the infrastructure in order to project the decoys into the environment, which you can see we've highlighted with blue squares. So in this diagram, in these 3 levels, you see 3 levels of decoys, and those are made to appear local through the connection to the HTTP sensor. So Chris will talk more about some of the other elements of the solution when we get to his piece. But so gents, before we pass on, we're at 2:37 on the time check here. Any other comments or questions as we continue?
I just wanted to reinforce, I mean, you already said it, but the solution not only provides decoys of servers and workstations, but actually in devices, a printer, a PLC, a camera, and we can demonstrate that to you. Just, if you reach out to us, we can do a more detailed demo of that, and just reach out.
Yeah, it's a
But
great point. We've only
I won't
showed a
dig
couple
into it.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, absolutely. There's over 150 built in. It might be even more than that by now. Built-in decoys right out of the box, as well as the ability to create custom decoys.
Yeah, I think that's a key part, though. The pre-configured playbooks that we're able to utilize, right? It makes it so that an easy deployment, and it's something that's we've already those things are already written up so that we know how to be able to build those. I think that's a big key for us as well.
Yeah, Chris, and yeah, Eugene and I have been dominating this conversation so far, and I know the audience is on the edge of their seats, wanting to hear from the handsome man in the lovely white shirt. And that would be
Always.
Eugene too, by the way. Yes.
That's true.
He's
There's
my
a couple
twin
of
from a
us.
different mother. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Well, no, I'm happy to talk a little bit about the use case and just to share some insights with what we've been using and this customer specifically. Recently, there was a customer that reached out. They started to do kind of a cyber plan for their OT systems. They wanted to make sure that their operation, their facility itself was always up and running, that it was safe and secure, and that they wanted to make sure that they could do additional security controls so that they could ensure that that facility would be up and running. This was after the time of different breaches that had happened. The Colonial Pipeline, I recall, was one of our conversations about how that system itself shut things down and shut the operation down. So this customer had reached out. They have endpoint protection. They have some monitoring capabilities of their OT infrastructure, but they wanted an additional solution that didn't require somebody sitting at a computer screen 24/7, 365, monitoring things. They wanted a solution that was somewhat like you just put it out there and that it works. So it could be like passive and independent of their production system, and it would be something that they could be able to utilize and be able to make sure that their system continued to work and that they could be more secure. So essentially, we went through it, and they have a kind of a risk reduction strategy that they had put in place, that they were saying, all right, we need something more on our OT infrastructure. Their IT team, they have some oversight of the OT system, but this OT team themselves were essentially kind of left on their own island, where they had to make sure that, like, if there was a cyber incident in the OT infrastructure, it would come down to them. They've started now to work with their IT team to integrate more of the solutions to be able to help them see the different things that they're seeing, even with HTTP, such as being able to send the alerts to their SOC team, which is the IT team, so that they can be able to do some additional things with it. But the customer, like, they are a little bit more advanced in their cyber maturity, but it's something that they could see that they needed to do additional things to be able to protect their infrastructure. Go ahead to the next one. So what we ended up doing is we ended up deploying a hardware application. We didn't do an in-cloud one. We actually we deployed it there on site. And the hardest part about the deployment was actually carrying the server to the site and taking it on site. Servers
Chris,
are heavy.
one of the most highly secured. We cannot mention the customer, but we'll just say it was one of the most highly secured environments I've ever went into in my
Yeah.
30-some year career.
Yeah. Well, and even the server itself, like, they had to validate it and verify where the parts were made, where it was coming from. Like, we had to provide a lot of documentation so that they knew what we were bringing in and where we were going. They went through the cables to make sure, like, any of the cables, they were all, charted for and cataloged. So, but the most difficult thing was honestly just taking that device in, which it really wasn't difficult at all. So we went into a lab environment at the customer site where we spent pretty much a day being able just to set this up for them. And maybe the reason why it took a little bit more time is they wanted it a little bit more customized to the things in which they were seeing. And then they also wanted some additional training on how to use it and how to utilize it. And then being able to show several different people within their leadership organization what we were doing and what was happening. So each time we'd start to be able to get everything up and running, there'd be somebody else there that we'd need to present it out to make sure that they were seeing what was happening. So when we were deploying this, we were trying to just integrate it with their system that was there in the lab so that they then could take that and to share with their leadership and see what other possibilities we could do with this type of a solution for their environment.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch a user come to the realization. So we were in a lab when you and I were there. They have since done other testing. It's interesting for them to look on their screen and see, maybe they look around their lab and maybe there's 20 devices in there. And for you folks a little bit more technical, the system will deploy up to the amount of available IP addresses, and it can be configured. So you can configure the system to deploy 1, 5, 8, but if there's 100 free IP addresses, you could do up, you wouldn't want to do that, that would be a bad design, but you could do that many. So it's interesting that somebody could turn up to see their faces when they would look on the network map, and it might show a dozen different devices there. And they're all real from a computer perspective. Somebody would try and log into them, look at their interfaces, but of course, we're in this lab space and they're not appearing out of anywhere. And especially when these folks know how long it takes just to get any device spun up. If they wanted to get a workstation spun up, to do a decoy manually, the procurement process, the IT people, and you could turn a decoy up in less than a minute, what we were seeing that day. So
yeah. Well, and that was one of the biggest pieces that they found interesting, was that we could be able to show them like a not real device that was on their existing infrastructure, and how quickly that was there, and that they could be able to see it, so that then we could show them why attackers would go after that versus their actual system. So a lot of it, it comes down to the point that they had the ability to have those different decoys, breadcrumbs, baits, lures, all on their system to be able to show how much additional protection that would provide for them. And the part that they also like is that it's not something that somebody has to sit in that lab and just monitor all the time. Like if somebody messes with any of those systems, there's alerts that can be generated from the system so that they're aware that, all right, somebody's trying to get in here, whether that's a text message or an email alert, or again, even being able to have it go to the SOC team to be able to see that integration, that's a capability and possibility as well for them. Because really, they wanted a solution that was kind of just, hey, throw it out there. Let's try to make sure that it's safe. And then let's make sure that we can have reports on if anybody is in there trying to do something they shouldn't. And a lot of the things that they were looking for were essentially insider threat. And some of the insider threat could be on accident, right? Eugene mentioned earlier about messing up when you're putting something in. That happens all the time. So if somebody's clicking on some of these things that they shouldn't be, or they're trying to get access to things that they shouldn't, then they're going to be able to see that and be able to be aware of additional training that needs to happen with employees, or additional awareness of the different OT infrastructure that they have already deployed within their facility.
yeah, Eugene, you mentioned before about the Wi-Fi. Somebody came in and put a Wi-Fi router in.
Yeah.
The decoys will respond to scans. And in fact, in our experience, that's the number one finding right out of the gate. We install the system, it's up and running, and customers immediately find things that are scanning that they didn't expect to be scanning. And not all malicious. We would call those false positives. It's not even a negative finding. Because there's noise coming from those devices. Sometimes the devices aren't even in inventory, which was Eugene's point. So you will hear right away, and the system will tune those out, and they lump the alerts together. So we're not talking about a very noisy system in an environment like this, but the defenders and network planners get information almost immediately about that sort of activity.
Hey, I hate to jump ahead too much, but you guys have covered some ground here, and it actually lines up very well with a question that came in. There's a couple questions that already came in.
Oh, sure.
So I'd like to try to address it, then please augment you guys as
Yeah, and
necessary.
just for time purposes, Eugene, after this, we've got the video that runs about 1.5 minutes. So we certainly have time to take a couple of questions now that we're talking.
So how do you guarantee zero false positive for an OT environment so that the alerts can be leveraged by an OT SOC? So both you and Chris said some things, and I wasn't sure if the audience could, in their minds had mapped it to this to answer this question. But one is if an attacker makes you if an attacker touches any of the breadcrumbs or baits, with like the fake tool sets that Scott talked about, even if they just ping, let's say they get to a legitimate ping command is in there, if they even try to ping a projected device IP address, then we immediately know that that is fake or somebody's doing something they shouldn't, right? Because they're interacting with the threat defense platform itself, and no real device should be accessing any of those baits, breadcrumbs, or projected devices at all. So the fact that anybody or anything tries to access them, then you immediately know that there's an issue there. The other part of it is what Scott said. Hey, like speaking to the false positive, like if there's devices on there that are real devices, but we didn't know about it, so that might get flagged. I wouldn't necessarily call it a false positive. You might say, yeah, it is. The device is legit. Like, well, it might be, but you didn't know it before.
Yeah,
so it's helping you clean
learned.
up your system. That actually needs to be actively engaged and managed, right? So I wouldn't say that's a true false positive. It's something that needs to be, addressed. So I
Yeah,
might
and
add to
Eugene,
this.
you made this point before about the fact that breaches happen, and the way they happen is that all the other stuff fails. So your EDR, your endpoint stuff failed, your firewall failed, your training failed. You trained your people not to click on stuff. All that fails. What HTTP does, it answers that question: what are you going to do when that breach happens? When an insider or somebody has gotten past all that other stuff? And you can't simply say, well, we spend a lot of dollars on that stuff, it's never going to fail. We read about breaches all the time, that stuff fails. So this gives defenders that last line of defense that's highly reliable, high fidelity alerts, and then this ability to engage with an attacker. So you're not just immediately trying to get them off your network. You in this case would be Honeywell, interfacing with the attacker in real time, and that's a tremendous advantage. So why don't we do the video, and then that'll leave us 7 or 8 minutes left to take some more questions here.
When you work in IT, cybersecurity is critical. But what if you depend on OT? The operational technologies in a building frequently aren't protected. And that's why some of the most notorious cyber attacks begin with an OT breach. It's time to turn passive defense into active security. And you don't need to be an IT expert. Use artificial intelligence to operate decoys configured like real network devices, but baited with artificial vulnerabilities. Any interaction with a decoy is an attack. Access is instantly blocked, traced, and our experts are alerted, making it a powerful defense even against new threats. Deployment is simple. A single sensor installed on your network autonomously creates and monitors the decoys. It's the Honeywell Threat Defense Platform, part of the Honeywell Cybersecurity Platform. Protect your systems, protect your brand, and keep your business running. Because active security starts with Honeywell Cybersecurity.
Perfect. All right, guys, there is about 7 or 8 minutes left here. I see one other question that was asked about half an hour ago, 20 minutes ago, so we may have answered it, but I'll, just for housekeeping purposes, question was, how do you detect 0 days? Earlier, I'd shown a slide about the basics of the technology is it's not using heuristics or signatures. So anything that's coming into an environment, be it ransomware, be it an attacker actually typing commands and logging in, trying to log into devices, that's unexpected. And that's how a 0 day gets detected. What goes with that, and this is where Honeywell really plays the lead here, is a proper cyber deception design. You might think, I made this comment earlier, you might think, well, the more decoys, the merrier. That's actually not that's not an ideal situation. There's an element to changing the decoys periodically, which the platform lets you do. There's an element to creating close to or exact duplicates of what's in the environment. But then you also might want to create a couple of outliers. that thing that looks different, that maybe isn't as up to date as everything else. There's a attacker psychology hat that you can put on with a solution like this. You're thinking like an attacker would think. And much like a robber is looking for an open door and unlocked car, a bad guy is looking for an old system, unpatched system, something that stands out as different. They won't have a reason to suspect that deception is in place. And if they are even that sophisticated, or they have heard through their phishing or social engineering campaigns that you use cyber deception, that will slow them down because they'll have to double check their steps every single time. Or they'll learn you have cyber deception and they'll move on to a softer target. That would be what I would do. I would just go someplace else. Any closing comments? I don't see any more questions coming in, but let me ask you guys if you have other comments you want to make today.
I think from my side, knowing that this approach can be able to help building systems is huge. Also, knowing that it can be able to integrate with IT is fantastic. A lot of times we see solutions that are completely focused OT or IT, and they don't necessarily integrate. With this type of a solution, like we have that conversation with both OT and IT teams to be able to show them how this can be better help protect them. And it really it's about addressing the risks that each organization has and making sure that they're aware of what we can do to complement what they're already doing with their cybersecurity policies and procedures, and how this can be able to help them adhere to the different governance structures that their organizations have so that they can keep their systems running and that everything is safe and secure.
Yeah, for me, I would just like to say, I spoke earlier about incident response, how important that is. So this essentially is giving you an automated first response to an attack, right?
Great
Even
point.
before the human realizes it, the system realized it, they're going to engage. I think this is very important. Limits the damage, gives you time to respond, mitigates, the impact to your business. And then Chris spoke about, one of the things that we bring to the table, a big strength, we work with you. We analyze what your system capabilities are, both from people, processes, and physical devices of the network, and what your goals are. And so we have these pre-built playbooks that Chris talked about, allows the rapid deployment. So it gives you some kind of canned response based on your business type and the device types that make up your network. And then we customize that to meet your needs, to fit your environment, your goals.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So for more information, I'm representing Acalvio. I have an Acalvio link on the Zoom here. We have links to all the relevant Honeywell information, but a very quick search for Honeywell building cybersecurity, and you'll come across all of the necessary portfolio information. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending this call today. To those who attended live and to those who will listen to us on replay, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful evening. Good night, everybody.